Here's the real reason the U.S. attacked Iran. When I filmed this interview, you're about to see the bombs hadn't dropped yet. Negotiations were still happening. But in this conversation, we warned that an attack could be imminent. And just hours after that, overnight, it happened. This is my conversation with Dr. David Lesch, a former advisor to multiple presidential administrations and a Middle East expert, breaking down why this strike was coming and what could happen next. As we're taping the episode right now, the U.S. could be striking Iran. Are we on the brink of World War III?
I wouldn't say World War III, but possibly a regional war. Typically in these types of things, when this much force is amassed, a decision has already been made to use them, to use the force. Now, unfortunately, President Trump is not a typical leader, and he's been using this massive buildup, the largest in the Persian Gulf since the 2003 U.S.-led invasion of Iraq, to pressure Iran into making concessions on the nuclear issue, ballistic missiles issue, uranium enrichment issue, and their support for their proxies in the region. Whether or not he'll get anything, that's the big question. Probably not much.
As we speak right now, they have 2 aircraft carriers, fighter jets, even F-22 Raptors that are staged with Israel just in case that Iran retaliates.
Yeah, exactly. And the key was the USS Gerald Ford moving from the central Mediterranean and moving over to off the coast of Haifa in Israel. So it's there to protect Israel as well as to project force elsewhere in the region should Iran retaliate against U.S. Forces, U.S. bases against Israel.
Well, let me ask you this, because it was just back in June of 2025 that the U.S. struck Iranian nuclear sites, 3 of them, including the underground bunker Fordow. The president came later and he wrote on Truth Social that this was incredibly successful.
He said it was obliterated.
He said it was obliterated. That's right. Was that a true statement? Why are we going to war now again with Iran potentially?
Obviously, it was an exaggerated statement. Let's give the president a little benefit of the doubt. I mean, he's prone to hyperbole, but perhaps intelligence after the fact found that not as much was destroyed as was initially thought. So they still have the capability to enrich uranium. They've probably moved things around quite a bit. So it might not be as easy, not that it was easy the first time, to find and destroy their facilities. So obviously we did not destroy everything. But I think also Israel has been sounding the alarm that Iran has built up again their ballistic missile system capability, which of course their longer range missiles can hit Israel itself. They're probably as much or even more concerned with that.
President Trump just said this week that Iran could soon have a missile capable of reaching the United States. But according to Reuters reporting, at least 3 intelligence sources have disputed that. Who is right?
The intelligence sources. Iran does not have a missile capable of hitting the United States. Plain, simple,
so
period.
Are we looking at another Iraq-style weapons of mass destruction sort of war?
I hope not, because I think institutionally the Pentagon and so forth know the difference. And the president, it's his typical hyperbole or lack of correct information just to scare the public into supporting him that, this boogeyman Iraq can hit the United States. Well, they can't. I mean, the one in, the buildup to the war in Iraq in 2003 was something that the entire intelligence community, the Pentagon and the administration and the post-cathartic atmosphere of 9/11 just kind of went in that direction and built up these false premises to go to war with Iraq. I don't see that happening as much here. This is as much the decision of one man than anything else.
But is Iran a real threat to the United States and to Americans?
It has the capability and has had that capability. I mean, it has attacked U.S. facilities in the past. They support what the United States views as terrorist groups that have attacked U.S. facilities, most notably Hezbollah, and particularly in Lebanon when pro-Iranian Shiite groups carried out the attack of the U.S. Marine barracks at Beirut International Airport in October 1983, killing 241 Americans. And other groups like Hamas and some groups even as far away as Argentina and elsewhere that have attacked pro-West or Israeli interests and facilities as well.
Now, you are no stranger to conflict in the Middle East. You have advised former presidential administrations specifically regarding conflicts in the Middle East, and I want to get your take on this. But today, Vice President J.D. Vance came out and told the Washington Post that the White House is weighing options that include strikes on Iran that would ensure Iran isn't going to get a nuclear weapon, and said there was no chance of a drawn-out war in Iran if the U.S. strikes, even though Iran has already said that if the U.S. does, in fact, strike, that they're going to consider this an act of war and they will retaliate. Can we guarantee this is not going to be a long, drawn-out war?
You can never guarantee that. I mean, a lot of this type of stuff is about proportional responses and calibration, and those have to be quite precise. And some things are unanticipated and can spiral out of control. So any small conflict, as happened many times in the Middle East and elsewhere, can spiral out of control into a large-scale conflict. So, you can't guarantee that. But the Trump administration, they came to power saying, we're not going to get into these type of wars. And of course, we're seeing military action repeatedly in a number of instances throughout the globe. So they're trying to reassure their base and the American public that this is probably going to be a targeted strike of a few days. And the amount of, we said earlier that, it's the largest massing of forces in the Persian Gulf since the 2003 Iraq War. But it's not enough to engage in a prolonged conflict of several weeks. But then again, all it takes is one wayward ballistic missile, one wayward, drone strike that hits a U.S. facility that, that has a lot of soldiers in it and mass casualties, and then, the keeping it to a limited war becomes a lot less viable.
When you say targeted strikes, where? What are we? Are we targeting more nuclear sites? Are we targeting to remove the current regime? Mm-hmm. What are we looking at? Well,
maybe all of the above. I think intelligence, if they found where new facilities or old facilities where there is uranium enrichment, then those sites will be attacked. Also, ballistic missile sites. And maybe this occasion, more symbolic sites, like maybe Parliament or the Ministry of Defense, or the Supreme Guide, Ayatollah Khamenei's home, or something like that, especially if he's not there. I don't think we're out to decapitate the regime, but that could happen. It could happen by accident. I think the Israelis would like to take the Supreme Guide out. The U.S., in fact, in June, it's reported that Trump vetoed that, vetoed killing, actually, Ayatollah Khamenei. But the thing is, we've already done that before in June. It was something of a surprise because it was done while there were negotiations going on at the time, just like there are negotiations going on now. So the Iranians then were caught a little bit off guard. This time they're not, and they're much more prepared.
What advice would you give President Trump if you were his advisor right now?
I would say wait. I'd say wait until next week, where the IAEA inspectors are supposed to go into Iran again, and wait till their report. But on the other hand, maybe the Trump administration doesn't want to wait, because if the report comes back that, hey, they're really far away, they're like 5 years away from producing a nuclear weapon, then that takes the raison d'etre right out from under the Trump administration's reason for attacking Iran. So
that sounds like we want to go to war whether they're far away or not, from the way you just put it. Because if the report comes back and says that they're far away,
yeah,
right, you would think that the response would be, okay, well, then we don't need to attack.
Exactly. So that means maybe we will before the IAEA gets there. That's a consideration. But
so the decision has been made, really.
I think so.
Imminent at this point.
I think, again, by the time this airs, very well could have had a strike by then, a U.S. strike.
So if Iran is removed, what does that strategically mean for Israel?
Well, if the threat is removed from Iran or reduced, I mean, they would love to see regime change with, someone from the pro-democracy movements in Iran take over that, makes friends with the West and, renounces any sort of uranium enrichment and reduces their ballistic missile capability. That's their ideal scenario. But I don't think it's going to happen.
Let's clarify, though. Right now, Iran does not have a nuclear weapon.
No.
There are only 9 countries in the world that have nuclear weapons. Iran is not one of them. But Israel is. They have it. Why is it that one can have nuclear weapons and not the other?
Good question, and a lot of countries ask that question. Iran does not have a nuclear weapon. The problem or the fear in the West and with Israel and Saudi Arabia and others is that they're getting close to that 90% threshold of uranium enrichment that makes it weapons grade material. And they've said repeatedly, we're not doing this to build a nuclear weapon. It's for scientific research and medical use. But you don't need that high a level of nuclear enrichment, uranium enrichment that they've achieved. So no one believes them. And but they've always said they do not have a nuclear weapon nor want one. And Israel has an undeclared nuclear weapon arsenal, probably maybe a couple of hundred nuclear warheads. A program that started in the 1960s, and they are allowed to have one, I think. Because they built it very secretly. In fact, they spied on U.S. Facilities to get the knowledge to build nuclear weapons in the 60s and early 70s. And, for them, it's their ultimate deterrence because they see themselves as, this single outpost in a sea of Arab countries that are arrayed against them. And since they are allied with the United States, the most powerful country in the world, they get to keep theirs, and they get to keep that undeclared status.
Now, there has been a lot of criticism, though, towards Israel, especially in the last couple of years since the war in Gaza started and Israel attacking parts of Lebanon, being more aggressive.
This is the strongest Israel has ever been militarily in its history since it came into being in 1948. Absolutely. I mean, look what happened. They carried out an attack against Hamas leaders in the country of Qatar. A number of months ago, 6 months ago, whenever it was.
I remember that.
Remember that?
Yeah.
And no one, there was some outcries in the Arab world, but no one who has relations with Israel, it didn't happen. So they almost are doing anything with impunity because of their power right now.
But is it an American interest to go to war with Iran, or is this for Israel?
Good question. Israel certainly doesn't mind if we take action to weaken Iran, which of course is Israel's bête noire in the Middle East, along with Hezbollah in Lebanon. Iranian-supported Hezbollah in Lebanon. But I think that it's mostly for U.S. interests and for what Donald Trump, the president, sees as another crowning achievement if he can get a nuclear deal with Iran that's better than what we've had before. So Iran has been severely weakened because their ally is no longer there in Syria. Hezbollah has been severely weakened. Hamas has been severely weakened.
But it remains Israel's biggest threat in the region. Would you say that's a fair statement?
Certainly they see it as their biggest threat, and probably in a practical sense, Iran is still.
Iran does not have a nuclear weapon, but they have near weapons-grade uranium. What does that mean in practical terms?
It means that, and then this is one of the big questions, and there are many different answers to this question that have been put forth by various intelligence agencies throughout the West and in the United States. And that is, where are they in terms of uranium enrichment? I said earlier that you have to reach about 90%, which is weapons grade capability to build a nuclear weapon. Where are they? Is it 60, 70%? And depending on that percentage, how much time are they away from getting to 90%? In order to produce a nuclear weapon. And that's been anywhere from weeks to one intelligence assessment, I think in the United States recently, said 2 years.
But I'm still confused because if we supposedly took out 3 nuclear sites, where are they doing all that work?
Well, we didn't. We didn't take them out. We severely damaged them. And contrary to what President Trump said, we did not obliterate them. And maybe he thought so at the time. Maybe people were telling him at the time, and then subsequent intelligence and post-strike assessment revealed that, not as much as we thought. They still have uranium enrichment capability. They have other facilities that we didn't hit at that time. We hit the 2 main ones, and again, they're even probably more adept after that 12-day war last June in hiding and spreading out their uranium enrichment facilities.
Why wasn't it making headlines more in the last several months as all this was developing. Do Americans care about what
think
happens with us in Iran?
I think Americans really do care that we don't get into another war, and that's one of the reasons Trump got elected. That was one of the things he was bragging about. I'm not going to get us into any more wars, and any military action will be short. Or like Venezuela, a special ops, operation, and perhaps in this one, that's why again. They're going to keep it to maybe 2 or 3 days, maybe a few more days than that, a week, I think, at most. But that's a signal to the Iranians that, well, look, they really don't have any ground troop capability. The U.S. doesn't yet. It's mostly naval, Air Force, maybe some special operations. But this means they're not going to be involved in a long, drawn-out, war, in a ground war, which would be a horrible quagmire. I think that the Trump administration, when they carry out these strikes, again, targeted, fairly limited, symbolic in many ways, but will hopefully pressure either by through massing this force and leverage and pressure, or limited strikes and ramping those up until Iran and the U.S. get a deal where Trump can say, and I think this is really important to him, Trump can say, I got that nuclear deal with Iran that the Obama administration didn't get, or a lot better deal than the Obama administration had.
So that's the why.
I think so. I do.
That's the why. Where does Saudi Arabia, Turkey, Egypt come into play in all this? What is their response right now as this is all unfolding, and on which side do they fall right now?
Yeah, they all pretty much fall on the side of the United States, but they've all been counseling the Trump administration, don't attack Iran, because especially Saudi Arabia and countries in the Gulf like the United Arab Emirates and Bahrain, Qatar, and Oman, because they would be first targets. And several of those countries house U.S. bases, naval bases, or land bases. And the question is, if they give access to their airspace in order to attack Iran, will Iran retaliate against them, against oil facilities or whatnot? And so these countries would rather not see war, and which is one of the reasons the U.S. has brought 2 carrier force flotillas in there, so that we can carry out an air attack without necessarily using bases or airspace in countries that see themselves vulnerable to an Iranian counterattack.
You did mention specifically Saudi Arabia could step in. What role would they play? And what about United Arab Emirates as well?
Yeah. I think both kind of want to, keep their heads down and not be noticed because, they don't see much upside to this unless the Iranian regime falls, which I don't think is going to happen, at least not in the current circumstances. And so they're afraid that if the U.S. oversteps its mandate, so to speak, or what it thinks is its mandate in attacking Iran, that Iran will retaliate against Saudi oil facilities, which are in the east, which are in the Persian Gulf, facilities in the United Arab Emirates, and so forth.
So if they get dragged in, it wouldn't be proactive; it would be reactive.
Yeah, I don't think. If they are cooperating with the U.S., they're going to keep it as secret as possible, in terms of intelligence cooperation, in terms of maybe using airspace. Israel has improved its relationships with the Gulf countries, the Arab Gulf countries, quite a bit in the past 5 years, even despite the Gaza war. So there is a certain level of intelligence cooperation there. But again, they don't want to be, Saudi Arabia, UAE, first and foremost, do not want to be seen as having participated in any way in this conflict, certainly not in terms of being on the U.S.-Israeli side.
What is the one thing that Americans should fear, if there's anything at all to fear at this point?
Fearing that this spirals out of control in a tit-for-tat, attacks, retaliation, without any sort of negotiated settlement or prospect for a negotiated settlement, that then affects oil traffic and facilities in the Persian Gulf, and in the Red Sea, the Bab el-Mandeb with the Houthis, that could push up the price per barrel of oil precipitously, and that could lead to an inflationary trend, and that could hurt the U.S., which has been trying to fight against this inflationary trend. If Iran launches an all-out strike against Saudi oil facilities, most of which are located in the eastern Hassa region of Saudi Arabia along the Persian Gulf, then that could have long-term repercussions for the global oil market and then therefore the global oil economy, and therefore could possibly cause a recession, a global recession. That's the biggest thing I think Americans need to worry about right now. I think the Iranians are saying, we're not going to give it up. Come attack us. That's fine. We'll survive.
Now, they're saying we're not going to give it up because they've said that they're not going to use it for weapons. They're just using it to power the country. Why do they need to have it at all if they're not using it for weapons? Yeah,
it's interesting thing. I mean, they apparently use it for energy purpose to a certain degree and for medical purposes, but it's part of this regime, the Iranian regime's identity. One writer called it a fetish that, in developing uranium enrichment capability, it's a sign that they are a modernized country. And it's not just the regime. The Iranian population as a whole, even the ones who oppose the regime, take pride in this particular ability. And it's been drummed into their head. They've been indoctrinated that this is part of their cultural identity and national identity. So they are willing. This is the conundrum that the Trump administration doesn't understand, at least up till now, is that the Iranian regime would rather go to war than totally give up their uranium enrichment, because they identify with it so much that will overthrow them more so than war.
Was it also a part of their identity back in the 70s when, Iran was a strong ally of the U.S. at the time before that relationship was fractured?
Not as much. That's when the whole uranium enrichment started under our ally, the Shah of Iran, Mohammad Reza Pahlavi. And when he was the U.S. gendarme of the Gulf, the policeman of the Gulf, and we armed him more than perhaps any other leader in history, and from the U.S. perspective. As one person wrote at the time, it was like giving the keys to the largest liquor cabinet in the world to a confirmed alcoholic. And he had access to everything the Pentagon offered except for nuclear weapons, but they started to build up their own uranium enrichment capability, which was inherited after the revolution in 1979 by the Islamic Republic.
I'm going to interrupt you here for a second and ask you if you can give us a brief history going back. A lot of people don't know. Take us back to the 70s and take us back when all of this started.
I think you have to go back to the immediate post-World War II period, and our interest, the U.S. interest in Iran, is a function of the superpower Cold War between the Soviet Union and the United States, where Iran was a strategic prize in the area, and particularly in the Persian Gulf, where oil was starting to develop, and eventually where, by the 70s, 2/3 of the world's known oil reserves were in the Persian Gulf, including in Iran, which has hefty natural gas and oil reserves and a strategic position. And so that's why the Shah of Iran was the policeman of the Gulf. In fact, there was a dramatic meeting between President Richard Nixon and the Shah of Iran in 1972 in Tehran, their capital, where Nixon, he bangs the table and the Shah's over there, points his finger at the Shah and he says, "Protect me." Because we were coming out of the Vietnam War. We didn't have as much capability as we used to have. We were overstretched. And therefore, we needed allies in the region, like Israel and like Iran, to represent U.S. interests.
What year was the turning point where our relationship with Iran began to fracture?
1979. The Iranian Revolution came to fruition when the Shah fled and when Ayatollah Khomeini flew in from Paris and slowly shifted Iran from a monarchy to an Islamic republic. A turning point which shifted any possibility of a productive U.S.-Iranian relationship under Khomeini in the Islamic Republic was when the U.S. hostages were taken on November 4th, 1979. 52 U.S. hostages were held for 444 days. If you read Khomeini's speeches, before, from the early 1960s, when he really started to oppose the Shah, he holds the U.S. in contempt. It's the great Satan. The U.S. and Israel are responsible for all this stuff because when we arm the Shah, when we develop and train their security services, the repression that was very real and did occur during the Shah, the people see the U.S. as much responsible for this as the Shah. And the U.S. became enemy number one.
What are you not seeing on the news and out there that you feel is important that people need to be paying attention to in terms of the Middle East conflict?
I would say the situation in the West Bank. As we talked about earlier, the war in Gaza has, again, rightly taken the headlines in the Israeli-Palestinian situation over the last year since 2023. But that's also been used by this right-wing Israeli government to expand its footprint in the West Bank, with many seeing it as a precursor to annexing the West Bank. And the Trump administration has said, no, we do not want that to happen, but is not doing much to keep, to restrain the Israeli settlers or the Israeli government. And if that happens, what the Gaza war showed, the Hamas attack against Israel and the Israeli overwhelming response, is that the Palestinian issue still affects overall Arab-Israeli relations. And so a country like Saudi Arabia which was on the verge probably of normalizing relations with Israel in 2023, which is probably one of the reasons why Hamas carried out the attack against Israel, was disrupt any momentum toward an overall Arab-Israeli peace that would leave them out in the cold and without any leverage. But if Israel continues to expand in the West Bank and actually annexes the West Bank, I think that any sort of overall Arab-Israeli peace is going to be pushed way down the road, and no Arab country that doesn't already have peace will be able to enter into a normalized relationship with Israel for some time to come.
It's interesting to see the shift in the last few months. It was Gaza, Gaza, Gaza every day, and suddenly no one is talking about Gaza. Do you think that Israel right now is taking advantage of the Iranian distraction, the Epstein files, everything that's happening?
Absolutely. I mean, anytime, the U.S. attention, because the U.S. is the only one that can tell Israel, no, don't do that, and has the leverage and pressure to be able to do that, to constrain Israel. So anytime the U.S. is, and the president in particular, is distracted elsewhere, either on domestic issues or international issues, Israel, this particular government, is probably satisfied with that.
Why is it detrimental if they annex the West Bank?
It's against international law. Every U.S. government said that it's subject to negotiation as defined in UN Security Council resolutions over the years. The West Bank is mixed right now. The Oslo Accords divided the West Bank into various areas, A, B, and C zones, and some are areas that still delineated are under Israeli control, some mixed control, and some under Palestinian control. And what's happening is that those areas under Palestinian control and mixed control are being contracted by the expansion of settlements and the unconstrained activities of right-wing Israeli settlers who are trying to push out village by village Palestinians and pressuring them. There's a great article in the New York Times about this the other day. Some of the actions they're taking, where the Israeli government kind of casts a blind eye toward that.
Is there something that we need to be watching for? Could this escalate from regional into global very quickly?
I don't think this will. I mean, at most, I think this could escalate to a regional conflict or the U.S. involved in a quagmire. The only way, a World War III will occur if the Russians attack, Europe. World War III occurs or potential occurs if China tries to take Taiwan. Then that's the real possibility for World War III.
Now, I'd read reports that China was helping the Iranians.
China depends a lot on Iranian natural gas and oil. I believe, I might be wrong, but I believe Iran's biggest oil client is China.
Yes.
And they are doing this despite the international sanctions against selling Iranian oil. So China is breaking those sanctions. So that's how they're helping Iran, is that they're giving them an outlet to purchase oil. They're not really helping them in terms of arming them.
Everybody is staying back right now and just watching from far away and saying this is the U.S., Israel, Iran, and we're going to let them deal with it.
Absolutely.
And hopefully it stays confined to that.
Russia is ensconced, and Ukraine can't do anything. They didn't come to the aid of Bashar al-Assad. They were unable to. China, they've actually been working under, ironically, a U.S. security umbrella in the Middle East and elsewhere for decades to provide stability where their commercial interest and economic interest can flourish. But China has no interest and has never really shown much interest to get involved militarily.
Why do they hate each other so much, Israel and Iran? Why does Israel want Iran weaker? Mm-hmm. And why does Iran hate Israel?
Well, Iran and Israel had a strategic cooperation during the Shah of Iran's time, engineered by the United States, particularly in the 1960s and 70s. The reason for that is that both Israel and Iran had a common enemy called Iraq under Saddam Hussein. So they had strategic cooperation. And so the opposition to the Shah, led by Ayatollah Khomeini, and anyone else who opposed the Shah saw and saw the Shah as repressive, saw the United States and Israel as one and the same in terms of supporting this repression. And from the Iranian side, when Ayatollah Khomeini came to power with the Islamic Republic in 1978, they very much had an Islamic foreign policy, not an Iranian one, meaning it was less about Iranian strategic and national interests. It was more about spreading these revolutions, Islamic revolutions, and getting more Islamic republics throughout the Middle East. And so, Ayatollah Khomeini, shortly after coming to power, he said on many occasions, I'm going to go to Jerusalem through Baghdad, which is why Iraq, under Saddam Hussein, invaded Iran, one of the reasons, in September 1980. So, Israel and Jerusalem, which is considered one of the holiest sites in all of Islam, the Dome of the Rock is there and so forth, and was the first direction of prayer, actually, for Muslims during the early period of Muhammad's ministry, the Prophet Muhammad's ministry, before it shifted to Mecca. So it has great significance religiously. And Israel was always seen as one of the bogeymen by the supporters of Ayatollah Khomeini and himself during the reign of the Shah of Iran. And again, if you watch his speeches, Israel's all over the place. It's behind everything. I mean, it's hyperbole, and it's kind of entertaining actually to watch, except that a lot of people believed it. That the U.S. was behind everything. It's behind some things, and that's the problem. The U.S. and Israel do enough to make people think they're everything, and so it resonates with a population that's suffering and wants to blame somebody, and the Ayatollah Khomeini skillfully used that. So all of that has led to this animosity between the Islamic Republic of Iran and Israel, and because of that, and because of Iran's support of Hezbollah, right on the Israeli border in southern Lebanon, which Israel, frankly, has seen for years as a much bigger threat than Iran itself, but it's supported by Iran. So it's part of the whole matrix.
The proxy wars.
It's the proxy wars. And so Israel sees, because of how Iran views Israel sees Iran in a very similar way as its biggest enemy and biggest threat. And Iran built a capability to threaten Israel over the years.
You remove this regime, but a new extremist group rises. And is it better for the people of Iran to change from within, or is it better for an outside country, an outside force to come in and remove their people?
That's a great question. It's always better if the people themselves make the change. Because that will suggest a level of support and widespread support against the current regime, which maybe was on the verge of happening recently until the crackdown. But the question is right now, will they have enough coordinated opposition to overthrow this regime or cause its demise in some way in the near future? And I think what the U.S. and some others are saying, well, this is an opportunity to maybe accelerate that process from the outside with limited action, not a ground war, with limited action to push it aside or weaken it to the point where internal elements can push it aside, and then maybe have a more pro-Western regime. But as you pointed out, that's not a guarantee, especially any sort of regime, that is perceived to be, subordinate to the West or brought in some way by the West. That was one of the problems in Iraq, in the beginning, when we removed Saddam Hussein. The government there were seen as just being props for the United States, and they were not indigenously popular. A bunch of expats that hadn't been in Iraq for 30 years came in. So, this is why the Shah of Iran's son is is going around the media circuit to give interviews right now, because he's hoping that he could be, maybe put back into place. And I think most Iranians would say, no, we don't want that. We were against the Shah and that type of government.
So what do the Iranian people want now?
They want food on the table. They want electricity 24 hours a day. They want water available. They want jobs and opportunity. They want the inflation rate to go down by hundreds and hundreds of percentage points.
They don't want the Shah and they don't want Khomeini.
They want someone who will bring stability. I think most of those who oppose this particular regime want somebody that can bring stability and at least amiable relations with the international community that will remove these sanctions that international sanctions that have destroyed the Iranian economy. So I don't think they really care
But I mean,
what type.
do they have a democratic election system where they can do that now? Is there a third option?
Actually, they, even under the Islamic Republic, there have been municipal elections and provincial elections that most outsiders say are pretty are pretty robust and not as corrupt as you might think from the outside. Although certainly to Parliament and the presidential candidates at a national level, the Supreme Council, which led by the Supreme Guide Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, they vet all the contenders. So that's not as democratic. So there is some democratic tradition at a provincial and municipal level, in my opinion, in Iran. So it's not totally foreign.
What do you think is going to happen next?
I think the U.S. will attack. I think perhaps by the time this airs, the U.S. will have attacked it in a limited level, strategic strikes. Widespread probably, but not intended to overthrow the regime. If that happens, the Trump administration will be happy. I think Israel at the same time, they'll hit Hezbollah. They'll tighten up and probably hit maybe some places in Gaza because Hamas, maybe some elements of Hamas that want to rise up and support Iran. I think the Houthis will take action in the Bab el-Mandeb and the Red Sea area, and that the U.S. and Israel may strike them.